Your grandfather left you nothing because there was nothing left to leave. That is what my father said at the funeral reception, his hand firm on my shoulder, his voice carrying just enough sorrow to sound genuine. Around us, relatives nodded sympathetically. Poor Harold. Worked his whole life. Medical bills ate everything. Such a shame. My Aunt Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. He was such a proud man. It must have been so hard for him, losing everything like that. The medical bills, my father agreed, shaking his head slowly. Cancer treatment is brutal, and he insisted on paying out of pocket for the experimental treatments. Nothing we could do. I stood there in my black suit, the one my mother had bought me specifically for this occasion, and I felt nothing but emptiness. Grandpa Harold was gone, the man who had taught me to play chess, who had taken me fishing every summer, who had slipped me $100 bills and told me our little secret. That man was lying in a casket in the next room. And according to my father, he had died with nothing. I believed it. Why would I not believe it? I was 19 years old, and I had spent my entire life believing everything my parents told me. My father was a financial advisor. He helped people manage their money for a living. If he said Grandpa had lost everything, then Grandpa had lost everything. End of story. The reception dragged on for another 2 hours. People I barely recognized hugged me and told me what a wonderful man my grandfather was. My mother circulated through the room, accepting condolences with practiced grace, while my father stood by the buffet table, deep in conversation with a lawyer I did not recognize. I wanted to leave. I wanted to go home and crawl into bed and not think about death or money or any of it. But my mother had made it clear that we were expected to stay until the last guest departed. "This is important, Jacob," she had said that morning, adjusting my tie with efficient fingers. "People remember how you behave at funerals. You represent this family." So I stayed. I shook hands and accepted hugs and said, "Thank you for coming," until the words lost all meaning. It was almost 7 in the evening when I finally escaped to the parking lot, desperate for fresh air and silence. 3 hours after my father told me there was nothing left, a man in a gray suit approached me in the parking lot of the funeral home. He was not American. His accent was French, maybe Swiss. He was tall and impeccably dressed, with silver hair and the kind of posture that suggested military training or private schools or both. He handed me a manila envelope and said 7 words that would destroy my family forever. "Your grandfather asked me to deliver this." I stared at him, confused. "Who are you? How did you know my grandfather?" But he just shook his head slightly, almost apologetically. "I am not at liberty to discuss that. Your grandfather's instructions were very specific. The envelope is for your eyes only." Then he got into a black sedan with diplomatic plates and drove away before I could ask another question. I stood there for a long moment, clutching the envelope, watching the sedan disappear around a corner. My heart was pounding for reasons I did not fully understand. Something about the man's demeanor, about the formality of the delivery, told me this was not ordinary. I looked around the parking lot. A few other mourners were heading to their cars, but no one was paying attention to me. My parents were still inside, probably saying goodbye to the last stragglers. I opened the envelope right there, standing between 2 parked cars, my grandfather's casket probably not even in the ground yet. My hands were trembling as I pulled out the contents. Inside, I found a plane ticket to Monaco departing in 6 days. First class. One way. There was a small brass key with no label, just a number stamped into the metal. 7. And there was a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery in my grandfather's unmistakable shaky handwriting. "Jacob, you are the only one I trust. Vault 7, Banque Privée de Monaco. Do not tell your parents. Do not tell anyone. I am sorry I could not tell you sooner. I love you, Grandpa." I read the note 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Vault. Monaco? Why would my grandfather, who supposedly had nothing, have a vault in one of the richest places on earth? And why was he telling me not to trust my parents? My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the key. I shoved everything back into the envelope and looked around again, suddenly paranoid that someone might have seen me. But the parking lot was empty now. I was alone with my grandfather's secrets. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Jacob Miller. I had just turned 19 when my grandfather died, and I thought becoming an adult meant freedom. Instead, it meant finally being old enough to uncover the truth about the people who raised me. I grew up in a comfortable suburb of Philadelphia called Bryn Mawr, the kind of neighborhood where every house has a 2-car garage and a basketball hoop in the driveway. The streets were lined with oak trees that turned brilliant red and gold every autumn. The neighbors all knew each other's names. There was a country club where my parents played tennis on weekends, and a private school where I learned Latin and lacrosse. My parents, Richard and Catherine Miller, presented themselves as the picture of upper-middle-class success. My father worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm downtown. He wore expensive suits and drove a BMW and always seemed to be on the phone with important clients. My mother managed a small boutique that sold artisanal home goods, candles and pottery and hand-woven blankets from local artisans. The store never seemed particularly busy, but it gave her something to do, something to talk about at dinner parties. We took vacations to Florida every summer, staying at the same resort on Sanibel Island, where I would collect shells on the beach while my parents drank cocktails on the veranda. We went skiing in Vermont every winter, and once we spent Christmas in the Bahamas, which I remember mostly because of how sunburned I got. I never wanted for anything. When I needed a new laptop for school, it appeared. When I wanted to take guitar lessons, my parents signed me up. When I got my driver's license, there was a used but reliable Honda Accord waiting in the driveway with a bow on top. Looking back now, I can see the cracks in the facade. The way my parents argued behind closed doors about money, their voices rising and falling like waves. The time my mother came home with shopping bags from a designer store, and my father went pale before storming out of the room. The careful way they always deflected questions about their finances, changing the subject or making jokes about keeping the wolves from the door. But at the time, I did not notice any of it. I was a kid, and kids believe their parents. What I did notice was the difference between my life and my grandfather's life. My grandfather, Harold Miller, lived alone in a modest apartment in Trenton, about 45 minutes from our house. The place was clean but sparse, filled with furniture that looked like it had been there since the 1970s. The carpet was brown and worn. The kitchen appliances were avocado green. There was a television in the living room that still had an antenna on top, though Grandpa mostly just used it to watch the evening news. He drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic that rattled when it went over bumps. He clipped coupons from the Sunday newspaper and organized them in a small accordion file. He wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation every winter. A blue one, a gray one, and a maroon one with leather patches on the elbows. The apartment was filled with books. Shelves lined every wall, packed with volumes on history, science, philosophy, literature. Grandpa had a particular love for adventure stories, the old ones about explorers and treasure hunters and men who sailed across oceans seeking fortune. He used to read them to me when I was small, his voice taking on different accents for different characters, making me laugh and gasp and beg for just one more chapter. Grandpa used to be comfortable. My mother once told me when I was about 12, after I asked why we lived in a big house and Grandpa lived in a tiny apartment, but he made some bad investments, lost almost everything. It is very sad. I accepted this explanation without question. It made sense. Grandpa was old. Old people made mistakes with money, sometimes. It was sad, but it was not unusual. But there were things that did not quite fit with the story of the poor, unfortunate old man who had lost everything. But every summer, when I would spend 2 weeks with Grandpa Harold, he would take me to the nicest restaurant in town for my birthday dinner. We would dress up in our best clothes. Grandpa in a suit that seemed older than me, but was clearly well-made, me in whatever button-down shirt my mother had packed. The maitre d' always recognized Grandpa and led us to the best table in the house, by the window overlooking the garden. "Order whatever you want, Jacob," Grandpa would say, smiling at me over the top of his menu. "Tonight we celebrate." I would order the lobster or the steak, whatever seemed most expensive and exciting, and Grandpa would order the same. We would talk about books and school and my friends and what I wanted to be when I grew up. He listened to me like I was the most interesting person in the world. At the end of the meal, he would slip me a $100 bill under the table. "Our secret," he would whisper with a wink. "Do not tell your parents. Use it for something fun." I never did tell my parents. It felt like a sacred trust between us. Those $100 bills. I kept them hidden in an old sock at the back of my drawer, a secret treasure chest that only Grandpa and I knew about. He had a collection of first edition books that he kept in a locked cabinet in his study. I asked about them once, when I was about 14. The cabinet was made of dark oak with glass doors, and I could see the books inside, their spines faded but elegant. "What are those, Grandpa?" He paused, looking at the cabinet for a long moment. Then he smiled and ruffled my hair, which I hated but also secretly loved. "Some things are worth more than money, Jacob," he said. "Memories, knowledge, love. Those books are full of all three. Someday, when you are older, I will tell you about them." He never got the chance. The summer I turned 16, Grandpa got sick. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 2 years, maybe 3 if the treatment worked. I remember the day my parents told me. We were sitting in the living room after dinner, the television muted in the corner, and my father cleared his throat in that serious way that meant bad news was coming. "Jacob, we need to talk to you about Grandpa Harold." My mother was already crying, delicate tears sliding down her cheeks. She dabbed at them with a tissue, careful not to smudge her makeup. "The doctors found something," my father continued, "in his pancreas. It is cancer. Stage 3. The words did not make sense at first. Cancer was something that happened to other people's grandparents, to characters in movies, to abstract statistics in health class. Not to Grandpa Harold, who could still beat me at chess, and who could quote whole passages from his favorite books from memory. "Is he going to die?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to me, thin and young. My parents exchanged a look. "The doctors are going to try everything they can," my father said. "But you should prepare yourself. It might not be good." I wanted to see Grandpa immediately. I wanted to drive to Trenton and sit with him and tell him that I loved him and that he had to fight and that he could not leave me. But my parents said he was too tired for visitors. The diagnosis had been a shock. He needed time to rest. A week later, they told me that Grandpa had decided to move into an assisted care facility. It was better, they said. He would have nurses around the clock. He would get the help he needed. I asked for the name of the facility. I asked for the address. I asked when I could visit. "Soon," my mother said. "When he is settled." Soon turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. My parents handled everything. They took over his finances, his medical decisions, his entire life. They said it was too much for an old man to manage alone, especially one who was sick and scared. Grandpa did not argue. He trusted his son to take care of him. But something felt wrong. I could not put my finger on it, but something in the way my parents talked about Grandpa, in the way they deflected my questions, in the careful way they controlled my access to him. It felt wrong. I visited him in the hospital as often as I could, but my parents always seemed to have reasons why I could not stay long. He needs his rest, they would say. The doctors are running tests. We do not want to overwhelm him. Your schoolwork is important. The first time I saw Grandpa after the diagnosis, I barely recognized him. He had lost weight, his cheeks hollow beneath skin that looked like paper. His hands, which had always been so strong, trembled when he reached out to clasp mine. But his eyes were the same, that sharp intelligence, that warmth, that love. He looked at me, and his whole face lit up. "Jacob," he breathed. "My boy, come sit with me." I sat in the chair beside his bed and held his hand. We talked about books, about school, about nothing important. He asked me about my friends, about whether I had a girlfriend yet, about what I wanted to study in college, business. I told him, like Dad. Something flickered in his eyes then, a shadow, quickly hidden. "Business is good," he said carefully. "But remember, Jacob, there are many kinds of success. Money is not the only measure of a man." "I know, Grandpa. Do you?" He gripped my hand tighter. "Promise me something, Jacob. Promise me that you will always do what is right, even when it is hard, even when everyone around you is telling you to do something else. Promise me." I did not understand why he was so intense, so urgent, but I promised. Of course I promised. My mother appeared in the doorway. "Time to go, Jacob. Grandpa needs his rest." Grandpa's grip loosened. The light in his eyes dimmed. "Come back soon," he whispered. "I have things to tell you." But the next time I came to visit, a nurse told me that Grandpa was sleeping and could not be disturbed. And the time after that, my parents said the doctors had restricted visitors because of an infection risk. And the time after that, my mother reminded me about a paper that was due and suggested I postpone my visit until the weekend. Weeks went by, then months. I saw my grandfather maybe half a dozen times in the last 2 years of his life, always with my parents hovering nearby, always with some excuse to cut the visit short. The last time I saw Grandpa Harold alive, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. This was 3 days before he died, in a hospice room that smelled like antiseptic and flowers. His eyes were clear, clearer than they had been in months, like a flame burning bright before it goes out. "Jacob," he whispered, pulling me close. "Listen to me. This is important." I leaned in, my ear almost touching his lips. "Remember, Vault 7. Do you understand? Vault 7. "What?" I pulled back to look at his face. "Grandpa, what are you talking about? What vault?" But a nurse came in to adjust his 4, bustling around the bed with brisk efficiency. My mother appeared in the doorway, her expression tight. "Jacob, it is time to go." But Grandpa was trying to tell me something. "He is confused," my mother said, her voice clipped. "The pain medication makes him say strange things. You should not listen to his ramblings." I looked back at Grandpa. His eyes had gone cloudy again, the moment of clarity fading. He released my wrist and sank back into the pillows. "I love you," he said, his voice barely audible. "Remember that, Jacob. I love you." "I love you too, Grandpa." My mother took my arm and led me out of the room. At the door, I turned back for one last look. Grandpa was staring at the ceiling, his lips moving silently, like he was talking to someone I could not see. He died 3 days later. My parents called me at 2 a.m. to tell me. By the time I arrived at the hospice, they had already taken his body away. Standing in that parking lot, with the plane ticket in my hand, I finally understood what he had been trying to tell me. Vault 7. He had been pointing me toward the truth with his dying breath, and I had been too young and too naive to understand. I did not tell my parents about the envelope. I went home that night, my head spinning with questions, and hid everything in my closet behind a stack of old textbooks. I spent the next 5 days in a fog of grief and confusion, going through the motions of normal life while my mind raced in circles. I was supposed to be starting my sophomore year at Temple University in 2 weeks. I was supposed to be thinking about my business major and my part-time job at the campus bookstore and the apartment I was planning to share with 2 friends from my dorm. Instead, I was lying awake at night, staring at a brass key in the moonlight, wondering what secrets my grandfather had taken to his grave, or tried to take, because clearly he had found a way to reach out from beyond death, to point me toward something he wanted me to find. My parents noticed that something was wrong. They attributed it to grief, which was convenient for me. My mother made me soup and told me it was natural to feel sad after losing someone you loved. My father clapped me on the shoulder and said that Grandpa would want me to be strong, to focus on my future. I nodded and agreed and said all the right things. But inside, I was counting down the hours until my flight. The night before I was supposed to leave, I made the mistake of telling my mother I was going away for a few days. I needed some cover story, some excuse for why I would not be reachable. So I said I needed some time alone to process my grief, that I was going to stay with a friend in New York. Mike Castellano was my roommate from freshman year. We had stayed in touch over the summer, and it was plausible that I might visit him. It should have been a simple lie, but my mother looked at me with something I had never seen in her eyes before. Fear. Pure, undisguised fear. "Where are you really going, Jacob?" My stomach dropped. "I told you. New York. To see Mike." "You are lying to me." Her voice was flat, certain, like she had somehow read my mind. "Did someone give you something at the funeral?" "A man in a gray suit." My blood went cold. How did she know? How could she possibly know about the man in the parking lot? "What? No, I do not know what you are talking about." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face for some tell, some sign of deception. I tried to keep my expression neutral, tried to look confused rather than guilty. "Jacob," she said slowly, "if someone approached you, if someone gave you something, you would tell me, right? We are family. We do not keep secrets from each other." "Of course," I said. "I would tell you." She did not look convinced, but she turned and walked away without another word, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. An hour later, my father came to my room. He did not knock. He just opened the door and walked in, like he still thought of it as his house, his space, his right to enter whenever he pleased. "Your mother tells me you are planning a trip." I was sitting at my desk, pretending to work on something on my laptop. I closed the lid and turned to face him, just to see a friend. I told Mom. "New York," she said. "Yeah, Mike Castellano. You met him at move-in day last year." My father nodded slowly. He walked over to my window and looked out at the backyard, his hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Jacob." His voice was calm, reasonable, the same voice he used when he wanted to convince a client to make a particular investment. "I know the funeral was hard on you. Grandpa's death hit all of us. But running away is not the answer. Stay home. Be with your family. We can grieve together." "I am not running away. I just need some time." "Time for what?" I did not have a good answer to that. I shrugged. "To think. To process. I do not know." My father turned from the window and looked at me. His expression was calm, almost sympathetic, but there was something underneath, something cold and calculating that I had never noticed before. "Your grandfather was a confused old man at the end," he said. "The cancer spread to his brain. Did you know that? It affected his thinking, his judgment. He said a lot of things in those last months that did not make sense. Paranoid things. Accusations against people who loved him." "What kind of accusations?" "It does not matter. The point is, if he gave you something or told you something, you need to understand that it was the disease talking, not him, not the man you remember from your summers together, just a sick old man whose mind was failing. I thought about Grandpa's eyes in that hospice room. Clear, sharp, urgent, Vault 7. He did not give me anything. Good. My father walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. Because if there was something, if someone contacted you, you would tell me. Right. We are family, Jacob. We do not keep secrets from each other. Right, I said. No secrets. He left my room, and I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. They knew. Somehow, impossibly, they knew about the envelope, about the key, about Monaco, and they were terrified I would find out why. I left for the airport at 4 in the morning, before anyone else was awake. I had not slept at all. I had spent the whole night lying in bed, listening to the house settle around me, waiting for my parents to burst through the door and demand to know what I was doing. But they did not come. And at 3:45, I crept downstairs with my backpack, slipped out the back door, and walked 3 blocks to where I had ordered an Uber the night before. I took only a backpack with a change of clothes, my laptop, a phone charger, and my passport. I had gotten the passport last year for a school trip to Canada that had been canceled at the last minute due to a teacher's illness. At the time, I had been disappointed. Now, I was grateful. The airport was quiet at that hour, mostly business travelers in suits checking their phones, and parents with small children who had clearly been up all night. I checked in for my flight, went through security, and found my gate. I did not start to breathe normally until the plane was in the air. The flight to Paris took 8 hours. I could not sleep, could not read, could not focus on the movies playing on the screen in front of me. I just sat there, clutching my backpack with the key inside, watching the clouds roll by outside my window. First class was different from anything I had experienced. The seats were enormous, more like beds and chairs. A flight attendant brought me champagne and warm nuts and a meal that included actual silverware. Under normal circumstances, I would have been thrilled. But these were not normal circumstances. In Paris, I had a 3-hour layover. I wandered through the airport in a daze, bought a coffee I did not drink, and stared at the departure boards without really seeing them. When it was time to board my connection to Nice, I almost missed the announcement. The flight to Nice took another 2 hours. By the time I landed on the French Riviera, I had been traveling for almost 15 hours, and I was running on nothing but adrenaline and cold airplane coffee and the burning need to know the truth. Nice Côte d'Azur Airport was smaller than I expected and much more beautiful. The terminal was all glass and light, with views of the Mediterranean sparkling in the distance. Outside, palm trees swayed in a warm breeze that smelled like salt and flowers. I took a taxi to the cheap hotel I had booked in Nice, just across the border from Monaco. The hotel was clean but small, the kind of place that catered to backpackers and budget tourists. My room was barely big enough for the bed and a tiny bathroom, but it had a window that looked out over the red-tiled rooftops of the old town, and for a moment I just stood there, trying to convince myself this was really happening. I was in France. I was going to Monaco. I was about to open a vault that might contain answers to questions I had never thought to ask. I showered, changed into fresh clothes, and set out to find the Banque Privée de Monaco. Monaco is one of the smallest countries in the world. You can walk across it in about an hour. It is also one of the richest, a playground for billionaires and royalty, all gleaming yachts in the harbor and casino lights reflecting off the water, and buildings that looked like they had been designed by architects who had never heard the word restraint. I felt completely out of place in my jeans and Temple University hoodie, dragging my backpack past Ferraris parked on the street and women in diamonds walking tiny dogs. Everyone around me looked like they belonged in a magazine, effortlessly elegant, impossibly wealthy. And here I was, a college kid from Philadelphia who had never been to Europe before, about to walk into a private bank and claim an inheritance I did not know I had. The Banque Privée de Monaco was located in a limestone building that looked like it had been there for centuries. The facade was ornate, with carved columns and iron balconies, and a massive wooden door that probably weighed more than my car back home. Inside, everything was marble and mahogany and hushed voices. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light on oil paintings in gilt frames. The air smelled like money, if money had a smell, something like expensive leather and old paper and very subtle cologne. I approached the front desk feeling like an imposter, certain that security would throw me out at any moment. A woman in a tailored black dress looked up at me with polite skepticism. "May I help you?" "I am here to access a vault," I said. My voice came out stronger than I expected. "Vault 7. My name is Jacob Miller." The woman's expression flickered almost imperceptibly. She typed something into her computer, studied the screen, and her demeanor changed entirely. "One moment, Monsieur Miller." She made a phone call in rapid French, too fast for me to follow with my high school language skills. Then she rose from her desk and gestured for me to follow her. "Please come with me." She led me through a series of hallways, each more elegant than the last, until we reached a private elevator. A man in an expensive suit was waiting for us there. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and a face that suggested he had seen many strange things in his career and had learned not to be surprised by any of them. "Monsieur Miller." He shook my hand with a firm, dry grip. "I am Pierre Beaumont, the manager of private client services. We have been expecting you." "Expecting me?" "Your grandfather made arrangements many years ago. He specified that upon his death, you and only you would have access to Vault 7. He paused, studying my face. "I must ask, do you have the key?" I pulled it from my pocket, the small brass key with the number 7 stamped into its head. Pierre Beaumont looked at it, and something in his eyes shifted. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction, like a chess player watching a gambit finally pay off. "Excellent. Please follow me." The vault room was underground, behind 3 separate security doors that required codes, key cards, and biometric scans. At each checkpoint, Pierre Beaumont entered credentials and pressed his thumb to scanners. The deeper we went, the more surreal everything felt. "Your grandfather was very particular about security," Pierre explained as we descended in a small elevator with wood-paneled walls. "He visited this facility at least twice a year for the past 15 years. He updated his arrangements regularly. He wanted to ensure that everything would be perfect when the time came." "When the time came," I repeated. "You mean when he died?" "Yes." The elevator opened onto a long corridor lined with safety deposit boxes of various sizes, their brass faces gleaming under soft lighting. But Vault 7 was different. It was at the end of the corridor, behind its own steel door with a combination lock. "The combination was changed according to your grandfather's instructions," Beaumont explained. "It is now your birthday. Day, month, year. European format. My birthday, of course." He had chosen something only I would know, something my parents could not guess even if they tried. I entered the combination with trembling fingers, reversing the order of the date, the way Europeans wrote it. The lock clicked. The door swung open on silent hinges. "I will give you privacy," Beaumont said. "Take as much time as you need. There is an intercom button on the wall if you require anything." He left, his footsteps fading down the corridor. I stepped into the vault and let the door close behind me. The vault was about the size of a walk-in closet, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were filled with boxes of different sizes, folders with color-coded tabs, and what looked like very old leather-bound books. There was a small desk in the center of the room with a comfortable chair and a reading lamp, but my attention was immediately drawn to the single envelope sitting in the exact center of the desk, like it had been placed there specifically for this moment. My name was written on it in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, the letters shaky but determined. I sat down in the chair and opened the envelope with hands that would not stop trembling. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written on the same cream-colored stationery as the note that had come with the key. "My dearest Jacob," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am dead, and you have done what I asked. You have come to Monaco alone. You have not told your parents. I am so proud of you, and I am so sorry. I am sorry, because what you are about to learn will hurt you. It will change everything you think you know about your family, about me, about the life you have lived. But you deserve the truth, even if it comes too late. You have always deserved the truth. So let me tell you a story. The story of your grandfather. The real story, not the one your parents told you. I am not a poor man, Jacob. I never was. In 1962, when I was 30 years old, I started a small manufacturing company in New Jersey. We made precision components for the aerospace industry. Tiny parts that had to be perfect or planes would fall out of the sky. It was difficult work, demanding work, but I loved it. I loved the precision of it, the challenge of making something exactly right. By 1972, we had contracts with Boeing. By 1980, we were supplying parts to Lockheed and General Dynamics. By 1985, we won a contract with NASA to manufacture components for the Space Shuttle program. I stood on the tarmac at Cape Canaveral and watched the Challenger launch, knowing that my company had helped build the machinery that was carrying those astronauts into orbit. That was one of the proudest moments of my life. The worst moment came a year later, when I watched Challenger explode. None of our parts were involved, thank God, but I will never forget the horror of that morning. In 1990, I sold the company for $47 million. I was 58 years old, and I decided it was time to enjoy the fruits of my labor. But I was careful with the money, Jacob. I had grown up poor during the Depression, and I never forgot what it felt like to be hungry. So I invested wisely. I lived modestly. I did not want wealth to define me or my family. I did not want my son to grow up believing he was entitled to anything he had not earned. Your father, Richard, knew about the money. Of course he knew. He was my son. When he was young, I explained to him that he would inherit everything when I died, but that until then, he needed to build his own life, make his own success. I would help in a true emergency, but I would not simply hand him a fortune and let him coast through life. He did not take this well. Your father has always had expensive tastes and a talent for spending more than he earned. He became a financial advisor, which I was proud of, but he was never as good at managing money as he wanted people to believe. He made risky investments. He took shortcuts. He accumulated debts he could not pay. In 2008, when the market crashed, your father came to me desperate. He had made bad investments with his client's money, Jacob. Not his own money, his client's money. He was facing lawsuits, possibly criminal charges. He needed $3 million to make everyone whole and avoid prison. I gave it to him. He was my son. He was in trouble. What else could I do? I thought that would be the end of it. I thought he had learned his lesson. I was wrong, but it was never enough. The $3 million disappeared into the hole he had dug, and soon he was asking for more. Another $1 million to pay off debts. $500,000 for your mother's boutique, which was hemorrhaging money from day one. $2 million for the house in Bryn Mawr, which he claimed he could afford but could not. I kept giving. I kept believing that this time would be different, that this time he would get his life together. And then I discovered the truth. Over the next several years, I realized that your father was not just borrowing from me. He was stealing. He had convinced my banker that he had power of attorney over my accounts. He had forged my signature on transfer documents. He was systematically draining my assets without my knowledge or consent. By the time I discovered what was happening, almost $15 million had disappeared. $15 million, Jacob. Gone. When I confronted him, he denied everything. He said I was confused. He said I was getting old and forgetful, that I was misremembering things. He brought your mother into it, and she looked me in the eye and told me I was imagining things. She said I needed to see a doctor about my memory problems. I was not imagining things. They were gaslighting me, Jacob. That is a word you may not know. It means making someone question their own reality, their own sanity. Your parents looked at me, their father and father-in-law, and told me I was crazy when they knew perfectly well what they had done. I hired a private investigator, a man named Frank Delacroix, based in Philadelphia. For 3 years, he followed your father. He documented every meeting, every transaction, every lie. He gathered evidence, bank records, forged signatures, photographs, recordings. I have included all of this documentation in the vault for you to review. There are 17 boxes of evidence, Jacob. 17 boxes proving that your parents systematically robbed me of my life savings while telling me and you and everyone else that I was a confused old man who had lost everything to bad investments. By 2015, I had enough evidence to send your father to prison for decades. Bank fraud, wire fraud, elder abuse, forgery. The charges would have destroyed him. But I did not go to the police. Do you want to know why? Because of you, Jacob. You were 15 years old. You loved your parents. You were doing well in school. You had friends. You had a bright future ahead of you. If I sent your father to prison, I would destroy your family. I would destroy you. I could not do that to you. I loved you too much. So instead, I made a different plan. I quietly moved my remaining assets overseas to accounts your father did not know about. I established relationships with banks in Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the Cayman Islands. I created this vault. I arranged for my attorney in Geneva, a man named Henri Marchant, to contact you after my death and deliver the key. And I waited. When I got sick, your father saw his opportunity. He convinced me to let him take over my finances, my medical care, everything. By then, I had already hidden everything he had not stolen. But I let him believe there was more to take. I let him believe he had won. I let him move me to that facility where I was isolated from everyone I loved. I let him limit your visits. I let him tell everyone I was confused and paranoid. Because I knew, Jacob, I knew that someday you would find this vault and you would learn the truth. The truth is, Jacob, your parents have been stealing from me for 15 years. They took over $20 million from my accounts. $20 million. They let me live in a tiny apartment, wearing old clothes, driving an old car, while they spent my money on their comfortable life. They told everyone, including you, that I had lost everything to bad investments. They made me look like a fool and a failure. And the whole time, they were the thieves. They were the liars. They were the ones who betrayed me. The house you grew up in, I paid for it. Though your father told you he bought it himself. Every mortgage payment came from money he stole from me. Your mother's boutique, I financed it. Not once, but 3 times. It has never made a profit. It exists only as a way for your mother to feel important, funded entirely by my stolen money. Your college fund? It does not exist. They spent it years ago, back when you were in middle school. I do not know what they were planning to tell you when you graduated. Probably that there had been some financial setback, some unavoidable crisis. They are very good at lying, Jacob. They have had a lot of practice. Every vacation you ever took, Every Christmas present under the tree, every new car in the driveway, all of it came from my stolen money. All of it. I am sorry, Jacob. I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I was afraid. I was ashamed. I wanted to protect you. And in trying to protect you, I left you vulnerable to the same people who hurt me. But now you are 19 years old. You are an adult, and you deserve to know the truth. In this vault, you will find the following. 1. Documentation of every theft your parents committed, including bank records, forged signatures, wire transfer receipts, and private investigator reports. Frank Delacroix spent 3 years building this case. It is airtight. 2. Statements for accounts in Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the Cayman Islands, totaling approximately $4.7 million. These accounts are now in your name. I transferred ownership 6 months before I died, while I still had the legal capacity to do so. Pierre Beaumont and his colleagues have been instructed to assist you with anything you need. 3. The deed to a property in Vermont that your parents do not know about. It was your grandmother's family home, a cabin on a lake where we spent our honeymoon 53 years ago. I have maintained it all these years, hoping that someday you might want it. There are photographs of us there, your grandmother and me. I think you would like to see them. 4. My first edition book collection, the one in the locked cabinet that you always asked about. 73 volumes, including a first printing of The Great Gatsby and a signed copy of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. They are worth approximately $200,000 at current market value. But more importantly, they are full of memories. Every book in that collection has a story behind it. 5. A letter to be delivered to the FBI and the IRS detailing your parents' financial crimes. I prepared this letter with the help of my attorneys. It includes all the evidence, all the documentation, everything they would need to build a case. I have not sent this letter yet. That decision is yours to make. Jacob, I am not telling you what to do. I am not asking you to forgive your parents or to destroy them. I am simply giving you the truth and the resources to make your own choice. But I want you to know something. You were the best part of my life. Every summer you spent with me, every birthday dinner at that restaurant, every book we read together, every game of chess we played, you were the reason I kept going when everything else had been taken from me. You were the reason I planned so carefully for this moment. I knew you would come, Jacob. I knew you would not listen to your parents when they told you not to go. I knew you would have the courage to find the truth. That is why I chose you. Not because you are my only grandchild, but because you are the only person in my family who I trust to do what is right. I love you, Jacob, more than you will ever know, more than I was ever able to tell you. Whatever you decide to do with this information, I will support you. I will always support you, even from beyond the grave. Be brave. Be honest. Be the man I always knew you could be. Your grandfather, Harold. I do not know how long I sat in that vault, holding my grandfather's letter, crying so hard I could barely breathe. Time seemed to stop. The air in that small room felt thick, suffocating, but I could not bring myself to leave. Everything I knew was a lie. My comfortable childhood, my loving family, my parents' success. All of it was built on theft and deception and the systematic exploitation of an old man who had done nothing but love his son. I thought about my father's reasonable voice, explaining why Grandpa lived in that modest apartment. I can still hear it now, patient and sympathetic and completely, utterly false. He made some bad investments, Jacob. It happens to a lot of people. We help him out when we can. I thought about my mother's sympathetic sighs whenever Grandpa's bad investments came up at family gatherings. The way she would shake her head and say, "Such a shame. He used to be so sharp." I thought about all the times they had discouraged me from spending too much time with him. He needs his rest, Jacob. The doctors say too many visitors tire him out. You have school to focus on." All the times they had cut my visits short, found excuses to keep me away, limited my access to the one person in my family who actually loved me. They were not protecting Grandpa. They were protecting themselves. They were afraid that if I spent too much time with him, he might tell me the truth. They were afraid of exactly this moment. I spent the next 3 hours going through the documents in the vault. There were boxes and boxes of evidence, more than I could process in a single sitting. But I made myself look at all of it, every damning page, because I needed to understand the full scope of what my parents had done. Bank statements showing transfers to accounts in my parents' names. Hundreds of them, spanning years, each one a theft. The amounts varied from a few $1,000s to several $100,000, depending on my father's needs at the moment. Forged signatures that looked nothing like my grandfather's handwriting. When I compared them to the letter he had written me, the difference was obvious. My grandfather's writing was shaky but distinctive, with particular flourishes on certain letters. The forged signatures were smoother, more generic. Someone, presumably my father, had practiced a version of Grandpa's signature that would fool a busy banker but would never hold up under scrutiny. Private investigator reports documenting my father's activities. There were photographs of him entering banks, meeting with lawyers, going to expensive restaurants and exclusive clubs. There were receipts for purchases he had made, new cars and jewelry, and trips to places I had never heard of. There was a section documenting an affair he had apparently been having with a woman in New York, meeting her in hotel rooms while telling my mother he was at conferences. That one hit me harder than I expected. Not because I cared about my father's faithfulness to my mother, not anymore, but because it showed me the full depth of his dishonesty. He did not just lie about money. He lied about everything. His entire life was a performance, a carefully constructed facade designed to hide the rotten truth underneath. There were also documents related to my grandfather's medical care, invoices from the assisted living facility, which charged astronomical fees for services that were never provided, records of conversations between my father and the facility administrators, arranging for Grandpa to be kept isolated, limiting his access to phones and visitors, ensuring that he could not communicate with anyone who might help him. My parents had not just stolen his money, they had stolen his freedom. They had trapped him in that facility, cut him off from everyone he loved, and let him die alone and abandoned. I found the letter to the FBI. It was sealed in a heavy envelope, addressed and stamped, ready to be mailed. The return address was a law firm in Geneva. All I had to do was drop it in a mailbox, and my parents would face federal charges for fraud, theft, and elder abuse. I held that envelope for a long time, feeling its weight in my hands, imagining what would happen if I sent it. My father in handcuffs, my mother sobbing as they led her away, the house seized, the accounts frozen, their lives destroyed. Part of me wanted it. Part of me wanted to watch them suffer the way they had made Grandpa suffer. But another part of me remembered birthday parties and Christmas mornings and the way my mother used to sing me to sleep when I was small. Another part of me remembered my father teaching me to ride a bike, his hand steady on my back, his voice encouraging me to keep trying even when I fell. Those memories felt false now, tainted by what I knew, but they were still there, stubbornly present, making everything more complicated than I wanted it to be. When I finally left the vault, Pierre Beaumont was waiting for me in a private client lounge with a cup of tea and a sympathetic expression. The lounge was elegant, with leather chairs and views of the harbor, but I barely noticed any of it. I felt hollowed out, emptied, like someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything I thought I knew about myself. "I take it you have learned the truth about your family situation," Pierre said gently. "You knew. Your grandfather was a client for many years. He spoke of you often, always with great pride and affection." Beaumont paused. "He also made extensive arrangements for your future. He wanted to ensure that you would be protected, no matter what happened. Protected from my own parents." Yes. I sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs. The cup of tea sat untouched on the table in front of me. "He also made arrangements for your immediate needs," Beaumont continued. "There is a credit card linked to one of your accounts. It has a limit of $50,000. Use it for whatever you require while you decide on your next steps." I stared at him. $50,000? Your grandfather wanted you to be comfortable while you process this information and make your decisions. He knew it would not be easy. I had never had more than a few $100s in my bank account at any one time. The idea that I could walk out of this building with access to $50,000, with access to $4.7 million, was so far beyond my comprehension that I could not even process it. For my entire life, I had believed we were a normal middle-class family. Now I was discovering that I had been an unwitting heir to a fortune the whole time, a fortune that my parents had systematically stolen. "What would you do?" I asked Pierre. "If you were in my position." He considered the question carefully, his brow furrowed. "I would take some time to think. Your grandfather gave you this information because he trusted your judgment. He believed you would make the right decision, even if it was a difficult one. You do not need to decide anything today. Take the time you need." He was right. I knew he was right. But as I walked out of the bank into the Monaco sunshine, all I could think about was my parents, back in Philadelphia, probably frantic with worry about where I had gone. Or maybe not worry, maybe fear. Maybe they were pacing the floor of that house my grandfather had paid for, wondering if their secrets were finally about to catch up with them. I checked my phone. I had turned it off before I left Philadelphia, knowing that my parents would try to track me, knowing that every ping from my phone would tell them exactly where I was. When I powered it back on, standing on a sunny sidewalk in Monaco, surrounded by tourists and luxury cars, I had 47 missed calls, 32 text messages, and 16 voicemails. The text started out concerned. "Jacob, where are you? We woke up and you were gone. Please call us immediately. Your mother is worried sick. This is not like you. What is going on? We checked with Mike. He says you are not with him. Jacob, please, just let us know you are safe." Then they got angry. "This is unacceptable, Jacob. You are being incredibly selfish. Whatever point you think you are making, you have made it. Come home. I have contacted the airline. I know you flew to Paris. What are you doing in Europe? Have you lost your mind? If you do not call us back within the hour, we are going to contact the authorities." Then desperate, "Please, Jacob, whatever you think you know, you need to let us explain. There are things you do not understand. We love you. We have always loved you. Whatever that envelope contained, it was lies. Your grandfather was not well. Please come home and let us talk about this as a family. Jacob, son, I am begging you, do not do anything rash. Do not make any decisions until you have heard our side of the story." The voicemails were worse. My mother crying, her voice thick with tears, asking me over and over where I was and why I was doing this to her. My father's voice, tight with controlled fury, demanding that I come home and talk like adults before I did anything stupid. The last voicemail was different. It was from my father, and his voice was calm. Too calm. The voice of a man who had realized that panic was not working and was trying a different approach. "Jacob, I know where you are. I know what you found. Before you do anything, you need to understand something. Your grandfather was a sick old man. He was paranoid. He spent his last years convinced that everyone was out to get him. He made accusations against your mother and me that were completely unfounded, based on nothing but his own delusional fears. Whatever documents you found in that vault, they are the product of a disturbed mind. They can be explained, every single one of them. But if you go to the authorities with these lies, with these fabrications, you will destroy your family. You will destroy your own future. Is that what you want? Is that the legacy you want to leave? Call me, Jacob. Let us talk about this like the adults we both are. I am your father. I deserve a chance to explain. I listened to that voicemail 3 times, studying every word, every inflection. He was good. I had to give him that. If I did not have boxes full of evidence sitting in a vault in Monaco, I might have believed him. He sounded so reasonable, so wounded, so sincere. But I did have those boxes. I had seen the forged signatures with my own eyes. I had read the private investigators' reports. I knew the truth, and I knew that my father was still lying, even now, even when everything was at stake. I deleted the voicemail and turned my phone off again. I did not go back to Philadelphia right away. I spent a week in Nice, in my cheap hotel room with its view of the red rooftops, reading through my grandfather's documents and trying to figure out what to do. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, undeniable. My father had not just stolen from Grandpa Harold. He had done it systematically, over years, with calculation and planning, and the full knowledge and participation of my mother. They had forged documents. They had lied to bankers. They had manipulated my grandfather's healthcare providers to keep him isolated and confused. They had, in every meaningful sense, imprisoned an old man so they could steal his life savings without interference. And they had done it all while looking me in the eye and telling me they loved me, while kissing me goodnight and cheering at my soccer games and pretending to be the perfect parents. I thought about confronting them. I thought about giving them a chance to explain, to apologize, to make things right somehow. Part of me still wanted to believe that there was some explanation I had not considered, some context that would make everything make sense. But then I remembered all the times Grandpa had tried to tell me something was wrong, all the times he had grabbed my hand with surprising strength and looked at me with those desperate, knowing eyes, all the times my parents had pulled me away, told me he was confused, told me not to listen to his ramblings. Vault 7. He had been trying to tell me the truth for years, and my parents had made sure I never heard it. They had had plenty of chances to explain. They had chosen lies instead, every single time. On the 7th day, I flew back to Philadelphia, but I did not go home. Instead, I went to the office of a lawyer named Margaret Chun, whose name I had found in my grandfather's documents. She was the American attorney who had worked with Henri Marchant in Geneva to set up the overseas accounts. She knew everything. Her office was in a glass tower in Center City, all modern furniture and impressive views of the Philadelphia skyline. She was a small woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes behind frameless glasses and a handshake that was firmer than I expected. "Mr. Miller." She gestured for me to sit across from her desk. "I have been expecting your call for several years now. I am glad you finally made it to Monaco. You knew about all of this the whole time. Your grandfather retained me in 2014 to help him protect his remaining assets and document your parents' activities. I worked closely with Monsieur Marchant in Geneva and with the private investigator, Mr. Delacroix." She paused, studying my face. "I also helped him prepare the letter to the FBI. Have you decided what you want to do with it?" I had thought about nothing else for 7 days. I had gone back and forth 1,000 times, arguing with myself in the mirror, listing pros and cons on hotel stationery, trying to figure out what my grandfather would want me to do. In the end, I had made my decision. "I want to confront them first," I said. "I want to look them in the eye and hear what they have to say for themselves. I want to give them one chance to tell the truth, and then, if they do not take full responsibility for what they did, If they do not confess, I want to send the letter." Margaret nodded slowly. "That is a measured approach. Compassionate, even given the circumstances. But I should warn you, Mr. Miller, people who have spent 15 years lying will not suddenly become honest because you ask them to. Your parents have a great deal to lose. They may become desperate. They may say or do things that surprise you. I am prepared for that. Are you? Because I need you to understand something. If your parents learn that you have this evidence and they believe you are going to use it, they may try to discredit you. They may claim you forged the documents yourself. They may try to have you declared mentally incompetent. They may even try to harm you. I had not considered that. The idea that my own parents might try to hurt me was so far outside my frame of reference that it took a moment to process. What do you suggest? I suggest we have this conversation in a controlled environment. My office, for example, with witnesses, with security, and with the understanding that if your parents do not agree to a full financial settlement and a signed confession, the letter goes to the FBI immediately. No negotiation, no second chances. I thought about what my father had said in his voicemail, about destroying my family, about my own future. But my family was already destroyed. They had destroyed it themselves, one forged signature at a time. And my future was mine to build, not theirs to control. Set up the meeting, I said. 3 days later, I sat in Margaret Chen's conference room with a folder of documents in front of me, waiting for my parents to arrive. The room was large and formal, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a long table made of polished wood. Margaret sat at the head of the table. 2 associates sat against the wall, ready to take notes. A security guard waited in the hallway outside. I had not seen my parents since the night before I left for Monaco. I had not spoken to them except through Margaret, who had informed them that they were being summoned to discuss a matter of inheritance related to the estate of Harold Miller. They did not know what I knew. Not yet. Not the full extent of it. My mother came in first. She looked terrible, worse than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her hair, usually so perfectly styled, was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing a wrinkled blouse and pants that did not quite match, like she had gotten dressed in the dark. "Jacob." She rushed toward me, arms outstretched, her face crumpling. "Thank God. We have been so worried. Where have you been? What is happening? Why would you not answer our calls?" I did not hug her back. I did not move from my chair. "Sit down, Mom." She stopped, her arms still half raised, her expression shifting from relief to confusion to something that might have been fear. "Jacob, what is wrong? Why are you being like this? Sit down." My father followed a moment later. His expression was carefully neutral, the mask he always wore when he was trying to control a situation. But I could see the tension in his jaw, the slight twitch in his left eye, the way his gaze darted around the room, taking in Margaret and the associates and the folder of documents and the general atmosphere of formality. "What is this about?" he demanded. "Jacob, what have you done? Who are these people?" "Sit down, Dad. Both of you. We need to talk." They sat across from me, my mother still sniffling, my father still trying to project authority. But I could see through both of them now. I could see the fear underneath. "I found Grandpa's vault," I said. The room went silent. I could hear the traffic from the street below, the distant hum of the building's climate control system. I watched my parents' faces carefully, looking for some sign of remorse, of guilt, of anything that might indicate they understood the magnitude of what they had done. What I saw instead was panic, pure animal panic, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. My mother's face went white. My father's hands clenched into fists on the table. "I do not know what you are talking about," my father said, his voice forcibly steady. "What vault?" Your grandfather did not have a vault. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. Bank statements, transfer records, forged signatures compared side by side with Grandpa's actual handwriting, the private investigator's reports with photographs and timestamps, the forged power of attorney documents that had allowed my father to access accounts that were never his to touch. This vault, I said, the one in Monaco, the one where Grandpa kept all the evidence of your crimes, the one he spent years filling with documentation of every single thing you stole from him. My mother made a small, strangled sound. Her hand flew to her mouth. My father's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, fear, calculation, and settled on defensive anger. Jacob, listen to me. Whatever you think those documents show, they are not what they appear to be. Your grandfather was confused in his last years. He was paranoid. He became convinced that everyone was trying to steal from him. He hired that private investigator to follow us, to build some kind of case. But it was all based on delusions. His mind was failing. The cancer, the medications, they affected his thinking. The bank records are not delusions. The forged signatures are not delusions. The private investigator who followed you for 3 years was not confused when he photographed you entering banks and meeting with lawyers and spending money you did not have. Those transfers were legitimate. We had your grandfather's permission. He wanted to help us. Then why did you forge his signature? Why did you tell his banker you had power of attorney when you did not? Why did you move money without his knowledge? My father's jaw tightened. Those are complex financial matters that you do not understand. Your grandfather was getting old. He could not manage his own affairs. We stepped in to help him. You stepped in to steal from him. Over $20 million, Dad. $20 million over 15 years. While you told everyone, including me, that he had nothing. While you let him live in a tiny apartment, wearing the same 3 sweaters over and over. While you put him in a facility and limited his visitors and made sure he could not tell anyone the truth. That is not what happened. I have seen the documents, Dad. I have read the private investigator's reports. I know about the affair with the woman in New York. I know about the boutique that has never made a profit. I know about every single lie you have told for the past 15 years. My mother was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking, her face buried in her hands. Private investigator, she whispered through her tears. He had us followed? I told them everything. About the letter my grandfather had written. About the evidence he had collected. About the $4.7 million he had hidden away, specifically so they could not steal it too. I told them about the letter to the FBI. About how Grandpa had been ready to send it for years, but had held back because of me, because he did not want to destroy my life. And now, I said, I have to decide whether to finish what he started. My father recovered faster than my mother. He was always the better liar, always the quicker thinker. Jacob, you do not understand the full picture. Yes, we borrowed some money from your grandfather over the years, but it was never theft. He agreed to help us when we were struggling. He wanted to support his family. He wanted to make sure you had a good life. These documents, this evidence you think you have, it is being taken out of context. Your grandfather was paranoid. He misinterpreted things. He built a case out of nothing because his mind was failing. You forged his signature. We had his permission. He asked us to sign things for him when his hands were too shaky to hold a pen. You told me he had no money. You told me he lost everything in bad investments. We were protecting you. We did not want you to feel like you had to depend on your grandfather's charity. We did not want you to think less of him for needing our help. You put him in a tiny apartment while you spent his money on a house and a business and vacations to Florida. He wanted to live simply. He was always frugal. That was his choice, not ours. I looked at my mother. Is that true, Mom? Did Grandpa want to live in a one-bedroom apartment in Trenton while you drove a Mercedes and ran a boutique that has never turned a profit? She would not meet my eyes. Her hands were trembling in her lap, and tears were streaming down her face, dripping onto the polished conference table. "We never meant for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It started small, just a little help, when we were struggling. Your father had made some bad investments, and the clients were threatening lawsuits, and we were going to lose everything. Your grandfather said he would help. He said family takes care of family. Catherine," my father's voice was sharp warning, "do not say another word." But my mother kept talking, the words pouring out of her like water from a broken dam, like she had been holding them in for years and could not contain them anymore. But then, once we realized how easy it was to move money around without anyone noticing, we could not stop. Your father said Grandpa would never notice. He said the accounts were so complicated that no one would ever be able to trace what we were doing. And by the time we realized how much we had taken, by the time we understood what we had done, it was too late to stop. It was too late to give it back. It was too late to undo any of it. "You could have stopped at any time," I said. "You could have told the truth. And gone to prison, lost our house, lost you." She looked up at me, her face ravaged by tears. "We did it for you, Jacob. Everything we did was to give you a good life. The house, the schools, the vacations. We wanted you to have opportunities that we never had. You did not do it for me. You did it for yourselves. And Grandpa paid the price. He trusted us," she sobbed. "He trusted Richard completely, and we betrayed him. We betrayed him over and over, and he knew the whole time, and he never said anything because he did not want to hurt you. He let us keep taking from him because he loved you more than he loved himself. That is enough." My father stood up, so suddenly his chair fell over backward, crashing against the floor. Margaret's associates tensed, and I could see the security guard in the hallway take a step closer to the door. "Jacob, this meeting is over. Whatever you think you are going to accomplish here, it ends now. You are our son. We are your parents. We are not going to sit here and be interrogated like criminals by our own child." "You are criminals," I said. My voice was calm, steadier than I expected. "You stole over $20 million from a dying old man. You committed fraud. You committed elder abuse. You forged documents and manipulated healthcare providers and lied to everyone who ever trusted you. And if you do not sit down and start telling the truth right now, if you do not take full responsibility for what you have done, I am going to mail this letter and let the FBI sort it out." I held up the sealed envelope, the one my grandfather had prepared, the one that had been sitting in his vault for years, waiting for this moment, the one that could send both of them to federal prison for a very long time. My father stared at it. His face cycled through rage, fear, calculation. I could see him weighing his options, trying to figure out if there was some way to talk his way out of this, some angle he had not yet tried. Then he sat back down. He picked up his chair and returned it to its proper position and folded his hands on the table. And when he looked at me again, his expression was cold, businesslike, the face he wore when negotiating with difficult clients. "What do you want?" he asked. Margaret Chin spoke for the first time since my parents had entered the room. Her voice was measured, professional, giving no indication of what she thought about any of this. "Mr. Miller, your son is prepared to offer you a settlement. In exchange for a full written confession to the crimes documented in these files and the return of all remaining stolen funds, Jacob will refrain from sending this letter to the federal authorities. Additionally, you will sign over the deed to the house, which was purchased with stolen money and therefore legally belongs to your father's estate. You will close the boutique and liquidate any remaining assets. and you will have no further contact with Jacob unless he initiates it. A confession? You want us to confess in writing to felonies? That could be used against us in court. That could destroy us. That is the point, I said. I want insurance. I want to know that if you ever try to steal from anyone again, if you ever lie to anyone the way you lied to Grandpa, and to me, I have something I can use. I want you to know that your freedom, your reputation, your entire future depends on you never, ever pulling anything like this again. My father laughed. It was a bitter, ugly sound, devoid of any real humor. You are blackmailing your own parents. After everything we did for you, after we raised you and loved you and gave you everything, you are blackmailing us. You stole from your own father while he was dying of cancer. You let him believe he had nothing while you spent his money on vacations and cars and a store that has never made a single dollar of profit. I think we are even. The negotiation took 4 hours. Margaret walked them through every document, every piece of evidence, every potential charge. She explained in calm, clinical terms exactly what would happen if the letter was sent, the investigation, the arrests, the trial, the likely sentences, which would be measured in decades, not years. My parents fought back. They argued, denied, minimized, deflected. My father tried every trick he knew, every manipulation, every appeal to family loyalty and parental authority. He invoked the years he had spent raising me. He reminded me of birthday parties and baseball games, and all the times he had told me he was proud of me. None of it worked. I had spent a week in Nice, reading through my grandfather's documents. I knew every lie they had told, every theft they had committed, every betrayal they had perpetrated. Nothing they said could change that. By the end of the negotiation, my parents had signed confessions admitting to 15 years of financial fraud, elder abuse, and forgery. They had agreed to transfer the deed to the house back to the estate, since it had been purchased with stolen money. They had agreed to close my mother's boutique, which had never been profitable anyway, and liquidate its assets. They had agreed to liquidate their retirement accounts and turn over the proceeds to me. In exchange, I agreed not to send the letter to the FBI. For now, the letter remained in Margaret's possession, to be sent immediately if my parents violated any term of the agreement. "This is not over," my father said as he signed the last document. His pen moved across the paper with sharp, angry strokes. "You think you have won, Jacob, but you have just destroyed your own family. How does that feel? How does it feel to know that you betrayed the people who gave you life?" I looked at him. This man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my homework and told me he loved me every single day of my life. This man who had stolen $20 million from his own father and lied about it for 15 years. "It feels like I finally know who you really are," I said. The aftermath was brutal, not quick, like ripping off a bandage, but slow and grinding. A months-long process of paperwork and lawyers and real estate transactions that felt like watching a building being demolished brick by brick. My parents lost almost everything. The house was sold at auction for less than they owed on the mortgage, which meant the proceeds went to the bank rather than to me. My mother's boutique was closed. The inventory was liquidated for pennies on the dollar, and the lease was terminated with significant penalties. Their retirement accounts, which had looked impressive on paper, turned out to be mostly debt and underwater investments. In the end, after paying off their debts and settling their obligations, my parents were left with almost nothing. They moved into a small rental apartment in a part of Philadelphia I had never visited, a neighborhood of convenience stores and laundromats and check-cashing places. My father took a job at a financial firm that did not ask too many questions about his past, one of those companies that prey on people who do not understand their own finances. My mother got a part-time job at a department store, standing behind a counter selling cosmetics to women who reminded her of what she used to be. I drove past their new apartment once, a few months after everything was settled. It was a brick building on a busy street, with bars on the first-floor windows and a parking lot full of old cars. Nothing like the house in Bryn Mawr, with its manicured lawn and its oak trees and its two-car garage. I sat in my car for a long time, looking at that building, trying to feel something. Satisfaction, maybe. Justice. Vindication. But all I felt was emptiness, and a kind of exhausted sadness that seemed to have no bottom. We do not speak anymore. I tried once, about 6 months after the settlement. I sent my mother an email asking if we could meet for coffee, somewhere neutral, just to talk. I thought maybe, with time, we could find some way to move forward. Not forgive exactly, but something. Some kind of acknowledgement that we were still connected, still family, despite everything. My father replied instead. One line, no greeting, no signature. You are no longer my son. I stared at that email for a long time. I read it over and over, waiting for it to hurt, waiting for the sting that I expected would come. But it did not hurt, not the way I thought it would. It just felt like confirmation of something I already knew. My father had never loved me for who I was. He had loved me as a possession, an accessory, a prop in the performance of his perfect life. And when I stopped playing my part, when I refused to be complicit in his lies, he discarded me without a second thought. I think about that email sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, about how easily he wrote me off after everything he had done, about how quickly he transformed from a father pleading for understanding to a stranger washing his hands of me. It should hurt more than it does. But I think I stopped being his son a long time ago when he decided that money was more important than family, when he looked at his own father, sick and vulnerable and trusting, and saw nothing but an opportunity. I used some of my grandfather's money to finish college. I graduated last year with a degree in business, not because I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps, but because I wanted to understand how he did what he did. I wanted to understand the systems he exploited, the loopholes he found, the mechanisms that allowed him to steal for 15 years without getting caught. Now I work for a nonprofit organization that helps elderly people protect themselves from financial exploitation. We do education programs in senior centers, teaching people about common scams and warning signs. We help families set up proper oversight of their parents' and grandparents' finances. We work with banks and lawyers to create systems that make it harder for predators to take advantage of vulnerable people. It feels like the right way to honor Grandpa's memory. He spent his last years fighting to protect himself from his own son. I spend my days trying to make sure other families do not have to go through what we went through. The property in Vermont, the one that belonged to my grandmother's family, I go there on weekends sometimes when the city feels like too much, when I need to remember what quiet sounds like. It is a small cabin on a lake, surrounded by pine trees and birch trees that turn gold in autumn. The cabin itself is old but well-maintained, with a stone fireplace and wooden floors that creak when you walk across them. My grandfather kept it up all those years, even when he was supposedly broke, even when he was living in that tiny apartment in Trenton. He paid the property taxes and the maintenance fees out of his hidden accounts, making sure it was ready for me when I finally found it. I found old photographs in the attic, stored in boxes that had not been opened in decades. My grandparents, when they were young, standing in front of the cabin on what must have been their honeymoon. My grandmother laughing at something off camera, her hair blowing in the wind. My grandfather with his arm around her, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They looked so happy, so in love, so full of hope for the future they were going to build together. I keep those photographs on my nightstand now, in my apartment in the city. Next to them, I keep the brass key that started everything. And next to that, I keep the letter my grandfather wrote me, folded carefully and stored in its original envelope. Some nights, I take out the letter and read it again. I know every word by now, could recite it from memory if I had to. But there is something comforting about seeing his handwriting, about holding the paper that he held, about feeling connected to him across the impossible distance of death. Some nights, I lie awake and wonder what would have happened if I had never opened that envelope, if I had listened to my parents and stayed home, if I had chosen ignorance over truth, comfort over justice. Would I be happier? Would I still have a family, still have parents who called on my birthday and came to my graduation and told me they were proud of me? Would I have gone through life believing the lie, never knowing what kind of people they really were? Maybe. Probably. Ignorance can be a kind of bliss, I suppose. There is something to be said for not knowing the truth about the people you love. But I do not think I could have lived that way. I do not think I could have looked at my parents across the dinner table, knowing what I know now, and pretended that everything was fine. I do not think I could have smiled and hugged them and called them Mom and Dad while the knowledge of what they had done ate away at me from the inside. My grandfather made a choice. He chose to protect me from the truth, even at great cost to himself. He let his son steal from him for years because he loved me too much to destroy my family. But he also gave me the tools to find the truth when I was ready. He trusted me to handle it. He believed I would make the right choice, whatever that meant. I think about that a lot, about the faith he had in me, about how much courage it must have taken to plan all of this, to set everything up so carefully, knowing he might not live to see the outcome, knowing that he was gambling his legacy on a 19-year-old kid who might or might not have the strength to do what needed to be done. I hope I lived up to his expectations. I hope he would be proud of the choices I made. But then I remember my grandfather's hand on my wrist, his voice whispering, "Vault 7. He was counting on me. He was trusting me to do what he could not do himself. I could not let him down. I would not let him down. The letter to the FBI is still in my possession. Margaret keeps it in a safe deposit box at her firm, ready to be sent at a moment's notice if my parents violate the terms of our agreement. I have not sent it. I do not know if I ever will. Part of me wants to let my parents live out their lives in peace, diminished as those lives now are. They are getting older. My father's hair has gone gray. My mother has developed a tremor in her hands. They are not the same people who stole $20 million from a dying man. They are smaller now, defeated, haunted by what they did and what it cost them. Part of me thinks that is punishment enough. Part of me thinks that forcing them to live with the consequences of their choices, to wake up every morning in that cramped apartment, knowing they threw away their entire lives for money they no longer have, is a kind of justice. But another part of me wants more. Another part of me wants to see them in handcuffs, wants to watch them stand before a judge and answer for their crimes. Another part of me thinks that real justice requires accountability, that letting them off with a settlement and a confession is letting them off too easy. I do not know which part of me is right. I do not know if there is a right answer. But mostly, I just want to move forward. I want to build a life that my grandfather would be proud of. I want to be the kind of man who protects the vulnerable, who tells the truth even when it hurts, who chooses what is right over what is easy. That is the legacy Grandpa Harold left me. Not the money, though the money helps. Not the evidence, though the evidence gives me leverage. But the example of a man who loved his family enough to sacrifice everything for them, even when they did not deserve it. A man who was betrayed by the people he trusted most, and still found a way to protect the one person who mattered. I think about him every day. I think about his smile and his laugh, and the way he would look at me like I was the most important person in the world. And every day, I try to be worthy of his trust. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did, if I wish I had handled things differently. If I miss my parents, the answer is complicated. Do I miss the parents I thought I had? The loving, supportive, honest people who raised me and wanted the best for me? Yes, I miss them terribly, but those people never existed. They were a performance, a mask, a convenient fiction designed to keep me from asking questions. The real people, the ones who stole from a dying old man and lied to their own son for 19 years, I do not miss them at all. What I do have now is something I never had before. The truth, my grandfather's love, preserved in his careful handwriting and his meticulous documentation. The knowledge that at least one person in my family saw me clearly, loved me unconditionally, and trusted me to do the right thing. That is worth more than all the money in Monaco. The last time I visited the vault, I found something I had missed before. Tucked behind a row of ledgers, there was a small wooden box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me. They were dated from the day I was born to the week before my grandfather died. He had been writing to me my entire life, telling me about his day, sharing his thoughts, recording his memories. He had never sent any of them because he knew my parents would intercept them. I read those letters over the course of a month, 1 or 2 a day, savoring each word. They were funny and sad and wise, and sometimes rambling. They told me about a man I thought I knew, but was only beginning to understand. In the last letter, dated just days before his death, my grandfather wrote something that I have memorized. Jacob, I have made many mistakes in my life. Trusting your father was the biggest one. But loving you, watching you grow into a fine young man, hoping that someday you would know the truth and forgive an old man for his cowardice, that was never a mistake. You were always the best decision I ever made. Whatever happens next, remember that. You are loved. You are worthy. And you are going to be okay. He was right. I am going to be okay. Not because of the money or the property or the evidence I hold over my parents' heads, but because I finally know who I am and where I come from. Because I have a foundation of truth to build my life upon. My grandfather gave me that gift, the gift of knowing, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to pay it forward. Last month, I got a phone call from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, there was a long silence, and then a voice I had not heard in over a year. Jacob. It was my mother. Please do not hang up. I did not hang up. I sat there, holding the phone, waiting. I know you hate us, she said. I know you have every right to hate us, but I need you to know something. I am sorry. Your father will never say it. He is too proud, but I am sorry. For everything. I did not know what to say. I had imagined this conversation 100 times, rehearsed all the things I would tell her, if I ever got the chance. But now that the moment was here, all those words seemed inadequate. Why did you do it? I finally asked. Why did you let it go on for so long? She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. Because it was easy. Because once we started, we could not stop. Because your father convinced me that your grandfather would never notice, and then that he deserved it, and then that we were entitled to it because of how hard our lives were. She paused. I know none of that makes sense. I know there is no excuse, but I need you to understand that I did not set out to become this person. It happened gradually, one small betrayal at a time, until suddenly I looked at myself and did not recognize what I saw. I thought about that, about how people become the villains of their own stories, about how easy it is to justify terrible things when you tell yourself the right lies. What do you want, Mom? I want to see you, just once. I want to tell you, to your face, how sorry I am. And then, if you never want to see me again, I will respect that. I said I would think about it. I have been thinking about it ever since. I do not know if I will call her back. I do not know if I am ready to forgive, or if forgiveness is even possible for what they did. But I know that my grandfather would want me to try. He spent his whole life protecting his family, even when they did not deserve it. Maybe that is what love looks like, when you strip away all the expectations and conditions and demands. Maybe love is just showing up, again and again, even when it hurts. The Vermont cabin is quiet this time of year. I am sitting on the dock, watching the sun set over the lake, and I am thinking about my grandfather. I am thinking about the summers we spent together, the books we read, the birthday dinners at the nicest restaurant in town. I am thinking about the $100 bills he would slip me, the first edition books in his locked cabinet, the way he would look at me like I was the most important person in the world. I am thinking about Vault 7 and the brass key and the letter that changed everything. And I am thinking about the future, about who I want to be and what kind of life I want to build, and how I am going to honor the trust my grandfather placed in me. I do not have all the answers yet. I am only 20 years old. I have a lot of living left to do, but I know one thing for certain. I am going to make him proud, no matter what it takes. The water is calm tonight, reflecting the last rays of sunlight like a mirror. Somewhere in the distance, a loon is calling, its haunting cry echoing across the lake. I close my eyes and breathe in the pine-scented air, and for the first time in a long time, I feel at peace. Grandpa Harold, wherever you are, thank you. Thank you for the truth. Thank you for the money. Thank you for loving me enough to let me make my own choices. I will not let you down. I promise. 6 months have passed since that sunset on the dock. I want to tell you about what happened next. I did call my mother back. We met at a coffee shop near her apartment, neutral territory. Both of us nervous and unsure. She looked older than I remembered. Smaller. Somehow, the woman who had once seemed so confident and put together now looked like she had been hollowed out from the inside. We talked for 3 hours. She told me things I had never known about her childhood, about how she met my father, about the early years of their marriage when they were struggling to make ends meet. She told me about the first time my father suggested they borrow from Grandpa Harold, how she had resisted at first, how she had eventually given in because she was tired and scared and did not know what else to do. She cried. I cried. We both said things we had been holding inside for years. At the end of our conversation, she asked me if I could ever forgive her. I told her I did not know, that forgiveness was not something I could just decide to do, that it would take time, maybe more time than either of us had. But I also told her that I was willing to try, that I would not shut the door completely, that maybe someday we could find our way back to something like a family. She hugged me then, and for a moment, she felt like the mother I remembered from childhood, the one who used to read me bedtime stories and make me soup when I was sick and tell me everything was going to be okay. I do not know if I believe that anymore, but I want to, and maybe that is a start. My father has not reached out. From what my mother tells me, he is still angry, still convinced that I betrayed him by choosing my grandfather over my own parents. I do not expect that to change anytime soon, but I have made my peace with it. I cannot control how my father feels. I can only control my own choices, my own actions, my own life. And right now, my life is pretty good. I have a job I love, helping elderly people protect themselves from the kind of exploitation my grandfather suffered. I have friends who know my story and accept me anyway. I have the cabin in Vermont, where I go whenever I need to remember what matters. And I have my grandfather's letters, his legacy of love and truth, reminding me every day of who I want to be. The money is still there, in accounts around the world, earning interest and waiting. I have used some of it for school, some for charity, some for the legal fees associated with holding my parents accountable. But mostly it just sits there. I do not need it to be happy. That is something my grandfather understood that my parents never did. Money is just a tool. It can build things or destroy things, depending on who is holding it. My grandfather used his money to protect me. My parents used it to betray him. I am going to use it to help people, to make the world a little bit safer for vulnerable old men and women who deserve better than to be exploited by the people they love. That is my promise to Grandpa Harold. That is my legacy. And that is how this story ends. Not with a dramatic confrontation or a neat resolution, but with a young man sitting on a dock in Vermont, watching the sun go down, thinking about the future. A future I get to choose for myself. A future built on truth. My name is Jacob Miller. I am 20 years old, and this is just the beginning. I went back to Monaco last month, not because I needed anything from the vault, but because I wanted to stand in that marble lobby one more time and remember how it felt to walk in there as a confused, grieving teenager and walk out as someone who finally understood the truth. Pierre Beaumont was still there, older now, but with the same kind eyes. "Monsieur Miller," he said, shaking my hand, "it is good to see you again. Your grandfather would be pleased to know that you are doing so well." "I hope so," I said. "I really hope so." We had coffee in his office, and he told me stories about my grandfather that I had never heard before, about how Grandpa Harold used to visit Monaco every year, long before he got sick, just to check on his accounts and make sure everything was in order, about how he would spend hours in the vault, organizing documents, writing letters, preparing for a day he hoped would never come. "He loved you very much," Pierre said. "He spoke of you constantly. He was so proud of the man you were becoming." I did not trust myself to respond to that. I just nodded and stared at my coffee cup, blinking back tears. Before I left, I went down to the vault one last time. I stood in that small room, surrounded by the evidence of my grandfather's careful planning, and I said goodbye. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered, "for everything. I will make you proud." Then I closed the vault door and walked away. The flight home was long, but I did not sleep. I spent the whole time looking out the window at the clouds, thinking about the past and the future and everything in between. I thought about my parents and whether I would ever be able to truly forgive them. I thought about my mother's tears in that coffee shop and my father's silence. I thought about the letter to the FBI, still sitting in my desk drawer, still waiting. And I thought about my grandfather, alone in his tiny apartment, writing letters he knew I would never receive, hoping against hope that someday the truth would come out. He trusted me with his legacy. He trusted me to do the right thing. I am still figuring out what that means. But I know one thing for sure. I am not going to let him down, no matter how hard it gets. No matter how complicated things become, I am going to honor his memory. I am going to tell his story, and I am going to make sure that what happened to him never happens to anyone else. That is my promise. That is my purpose. And that is who I am. Thank you for spending this time with me and hearing my story of growing up sooner than expected. Look at your screen now. There are 2 more stories from men who learned that adulthood begins when courage is needed. Choose the one you would like to hear. And if you would like to stay close to our community, just tap the notification bell.